Hi everyone and welcome to the Vassals of Kingsgrave. You are here for part 58 of the great linear reread of A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin. As usual, this episode could contain spoilers for all published books in the series as well as Winds of Winter preview chapters, but it will be free of show spoilers. I'm Mary, I'm your host today, also known as Nymeria on the podcast of Ice and Fire forums. I'm joined today by David.
Hi, I'm David HHH on the forums.
Alix.
Hi, I'm Alix, Aiwendil on the forums.
We have Matt Varley here. Varley, sorry.
Yeah, Varley on the forums.
And this is to do that in this order, but we also have Bina.
Hey everyone, Bina 007. Very happy to be a guest, not a host today.
Right? So weird.
Yeah.
So relaxed.
That's
the Dornish red is flowing.
All right, so this is a very exciting episode as we are discussing chapters from 3 different books today. Dany 2 from Dance, The Captain of the Guards from Feast, and Jon 9 from Storm. This is actually something we will do a lot in the next few episodes as the linear orders jumps from Storm to Feast a lot between January 20th and February 10th. Last episode ended with Jaime writing of his maiming in the White Book in Jaime 9, and we now jumped to Dany 2 in Dance. That's 66 chapters and 11 years. This takes place on January 20th, 2 weeks after the last Dany chapter, in which we saw her learn the news of Drogon killing the little girl Hazier. At this point, Dany is 16 years old, and we have David for the summary.
Hi. So this is a fun chapter because it's a big one with lots of big points, so I did my best to cut it down, but we'll see. So Dany dreams of a simple life married to Daario, but is woken up by Irri to meet with Grey Worm, Skahaz, and Reznak. Missandei is crying for the death of her brother Massador, who Dany is told was one of 9 killed in the night by the Sons of the Harpy. Despite patrolling well-armed in pairs, as Dany had ordered, they were killed by crossbows, falling stones, and poison, and 3 freedmen were killed in their homes. The owner of the wine shop where 2 were poisoned and his daughters were the only suspects in custody. She orders that they be questioned sweetly, but then agrees to let them be tortured after she hears that harpist Rylona Rhee had her fingers cut off before she was killed. Dany orders that the Unsullied will now only guard the walls and gates and herself, leaving the Meereenese to protect the streets. She orders a new watch made of shave-pates and freedmen, which will be paid for by a blood tax from the noble families. When she hears that 2 noble families are planning to leave, she orders that they must leave their gold and food behind. When Reznak says that they only wanted to protect their children, she gets the idea to take 2 children from each noble family to have the honor of serving the court as pages and cupbearers, aka hostages. Dany comforts Missandei, and asks her to tell her about her brother. Dany offers to send Missandei away to a better place, but Missandei says she would rather stay with Dany because she makes her feel safe. When Dany can't sleep because of her worries and responsibilities and worries that Daario has betrayed her, like in the prophecy, she decides to take a bath to relax her. Then comes a part we'll probably mostly be talking about. It's time for some vague prophecy. Quaithe is in his house. Well, soon to be Hizdar's house in about 5 months. She tells Dany that the glass candles are burning, the pale mare is coming, then the kraken and the dark flame, lion and griffin, the sun's son, and the mummer's dragon. Trust none of them. Remember the undying. Beware the perfumed seneschal. And Daenerys, remember the undying. Remember who you are. When Missandei comes in, Quaithe disappears. Dany wonders if she's going mad like her father. Soon Dany holds court. It's never a good idea to go to work on no sleep. She deals with some boring business stuff and tries to balance everyone's rights. Then Hizdahr, clean-shaven this time, yet again comes to plead her to open the fighting pits. He has brought 7 fighters, for her 7 gods, to plead their case. She suggests that if they want to fight, they should fight for her, but they want to fight for themselves and gold and glory. Hizdahr has offered them half of the gate gold, too, which makes Dany suspicious. But she doubts her resolve, especially against the will of the actual fighters, and promises to consider their request. Later, Dany asks Barristan to tell her about her escape from King's Landing. He tells her how Joffrey and her family claimed that they removed him because of his age, but that they had other ambitions. He realized that he brought it upon himself by accepting Robert's pardon, and to redeem himself, he must find the true king, who he had thought should be Viserys. Janis Slint and the City Watch tried to stop his escape, but he fought them all and escaped. He re-entered the city disguised in rags, bided his time, and he mentions that he saw Ned Stark's execution and was grateful that he was no longer in the Kingsguard. Dany said that Ned deserved it, but Barristan tells her that Ned had fought against Robert trying to have her killed and resigned. Dany isn't having it, saying that they were all usurpers' dogs, a pack that destroyed her family, including Aegon and Rhaenys, which made her think of Hazia, who Drogon had killed. She needs to see her dragons now. She descends to the pit that is now their home. They are chained by their necks and feet. She notes that they are larger than before, and Barristan tells her that they will keep growing if given food and space. But confined here, she wonders if the pit is large enough to contain them and what will happen if it's not. She thinks of the stories that Viserys had told her about Harrenhal, the Field of Fire, and the Dance of Dragons, and more, and remembers what her own dragons had done. She remembers Hazia and her father, who came to her with her bones, which were charred, he claimed, by Drogon. While others had doubted him, she believed him because he had waited until the hall audience was almost empty to come forward. When the Shave Pate had urged her to have him killed, instead she chose to pay him and have her bones laid to rest in the Temple of the Graces, with 100 candles burning day and night in her memory. He should come to her every year on Hazia's name day, and she would make sure that his children would never want, as long as he kept quiet. Dany had led Viserion to the pit and locked him in with oxen. Once he was gorged and fallen asleep, they had chained him up. Rhaegal had been harder and had to be covered in a heavy net and was dragged down to the pit over 3 days, killing 6 men in the struggle. They tried to capture Drogon 3 times, but failed, leaving 4 dead and 2 score burned. He escaped north towards the Dothraki Sea and hasn't returned. Dany wondered what she has unleashed on the world and if she was as much of a monster as they were. And that's it.
Thank you.
Sorry, that's a long one.
No, it's also a long chapter.
Right.
All Dany chapters are always very long, I feel. All right. Anyone has specific points about this? I think the Quaithe prophecy will be the center of the discussion, as you mentioned. But
Exactly.
yeah, go for it, folks.
Shall we do all non-prophecy related points first, or do you just want to get in?
Whatever you want to discuss first.
I do like that she's trying to find a balance between being kind to her people and the angry, vengeful dragon that she is. So, I like that. And I also like that the prophecies have made her doubt Daario.
Well, for just a second, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, she'll still
It's
through
not a
him.
permanent state.
For now, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't.
Yeah, go ahead,
I
Alex.
don't get how she's so obsessed with Daario at this point. Like he's been away for most of the time she's in Meereen, and he doesn't really have any influence on what's happening there. But she still keeps thinking about him all the time. I mean, I guess she's a teenage girl in love. Can't blame her for that. But I don't know. I don't feel like he's done much to earn her trust apart from betray other people, which isn't a very reassuring action. I don't know. I mean, I like Daario as a character. I think he's fun. I don't really know where I'm going with this.
Which is what I think she likes, that he's fun. He's fun, he's sexy, he's hot.
Has a golden tooth.
bad.
What is there not to love?
Oh my god.
Good and bad.
She doesn't know that yet.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's relevant to point out that she is 16 at this point, and like which of us makes sensible choices at 16. And I think it's like probably one of the most authentic and believable parts of her character is how she just keeps falling for like hot guys who aren't any good for her.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, at least this one's probably good in bed, because you can't imagine that her first was really worried about her pleasure or her concerns, where I think Daario would be, actually.
Although she seemed to have no complaints. I really struggle with the Dany chapters in Dance, and not because she's not moving forward. I just find it. I wonder how conscious you guys think George was in being influenced by what was going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. But reading it again, like I haven't read it since we did the Feast Dance reread back in the day. And it just felt kind of, maybe I'm reading into that, just very heavy-handed. This is what happened when people with certain cultural ideals conquer another place, and then they kind of get into this ground war against the people who don't appreciate their rule. And she thinks she's doing earnest good stuff like freeing the slaves, but it turns out they're poorer now and they have horrible lives. And just this,
they get murdered in their houses.
Yeah, and then she has to wear the toga, like she's trying to be culturally sensitive, and yet she's sticking to her principles. And I think a previous podcast had a really good discussion about why she didn't reopen the slave pits. Or the fighting pit, sorry. So I just find it really on the nose. And if you think this was published when 2010, he would have been maybe writing it 2007, 8, 9. Do you guys think it was conscious? Do you find it as heavy-handed as I do, or is that just me bringing baggage to it?
No, I think it's pretty on the nose, and based on like what he said, in interviews about being a pacifist, and like some wars are worth fighting and some are frivolous. I think that Dany's occupying force in, Meereen is pretty on the nose for what we were doing in Iraq and Afghanistan while he was writing.
Although, to be fair, she had a good reason for being there. She was trying to actually help them. Were we? I don't know. That's a debatable question.
Yeah, but was she, and were we? Like, she was there because of what? Some ideal that they were enslaved? Like, we had to topple Saddam from, free the people from this dictator, and she's trying to free the people from just the masters, so from one ruling class to another.
Absolutely. I think this falls into that category of the lies you tell yourself. So I think it's analogous, right? In both cases, you can say there was an earnest reason to go there and a more self-interested reason, because after all, pragmatic nation states, no one fights a war without some self-interest. And for Dany, she needs to get home with an army, and she also needs to learn how to rule, which I think is partly why she decides to stay. Like, she's not randomly going to Meereen because she wants to free people from the masters.
Yeah.
So, but there is a layer at which she does want to do that, and I think, as much as people criticize, I don't want to get into a foreign policy discussion, but I think it's possible to have both of those things operating earnestly at the same time. That's why it's so complex, and it's so believable to read. It's just I guess I read George, and I love the way there's analogies to the War of the Roses and medieval history, and that's all fun. But this is so close to comfort. It's like too close. I just don't want to. The real world is messy enough. I don't need it in my fantasy fiction, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, and this has been argued on other rereads that, Dany comes in and is like, well, this way of ruling people is wrong. I have to be the ruler. She doesn't offer anything else but her in power. Right. Your system is wrong and it's brutal to the underlings, and my system is better, but it has to be me as a ruler. It can't be, she doesn't offer democracy or, any other thing, but another sort of, power grab, some kind of,
Yeah, but nowhere has democracy at this point in Westeros or Essos, right? Sure. So I think she's offering what she thinks of as the most benign form of lordly rule.
What's her name? Volantis. Don't they vote for their triarchs or something?
Yeah, true. But I mean, I think it's not a common. It's more feudal, right?
It's very rare.
And they also have slaves. The whole point with Dany is that she's trying to free the slaves and rule a society with freed slaves and former masters, and that's where she is having trouble. Kind of, benefiting both sides and defending both sides' interests.
And she tries to get everyone's, sides taken care of at least somewhat. Realistically, though, I mean, no matter what she does, no one's going to be happy. I mean, it's a bad proposition from the start. It's not going to work no matter what she does. I can't imagine. I mean, can you think of any solution she could have come up with that would make everyone happy?
There's no such thing.
Right.
You can't
in any government, theoretically, in any government, that's probably true. Yeah. But particularly here, where you have, a privileged few, and you've got, recently freed slaves, it's not a winning proposition.
Are you trying to say that people wouldn't be happy if some kind of part of society was only able to access power while the rest of us just toiled in the factories?
No one's going to be happy with that, except for the rich, of course.
Anyway, so chaining the dragons up, so I think we talked about this earlier, but she doesn't actually realize what a kind of disaster, what kind of power she has in these dragons, until recently, right?
Well, until the last chapter, I think she didn't realize.
Right.
Until she saw that her dragon had killed a child, and there was really nothing she could do even though she's paying the guy and she buried his daughter in the temple of whatever, there's nothing really that can make up for a child's life.
Right.
And yeah, I think that was the moment where she realized, I have to do something about my dragons, because if I just leave them in the wild, this is going to be a daily occurrence.
Yeah, she realized that the dragons are immensely powerful, but she doesn't realize that that's her main asset too. That's maybe the only reason she could have a real claim to Westeros is it's the dragons. So I don't think chaining them up is really a solution either, because she just buries the issue and does nothing about it.
But at least
I don't know.
While they're in the pit, they're not killing people, you know?
Yeah, I don't know what else she could have done.
Right.
But
I mean, it seems...
at some point, if she means to use them, she needs to find a way to train them and to, I don't know, have some kind of control over them.
Yeah, it seems like this is just a stalling method, you know? I mean, that's all she's doing is, let's just take care of it for now and I'll deal with it later, if she ever gets to, which we've yet to see her do, but... What do you really do when you have weapons of mass destruction that you have pretty little control over?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a tough situation for her, but really, like, this is the key moment, right? I mean, as time goes by, she has less and less chance to keep her special relationship with the dragons and have some kind of parental control over them. And they are bigger and bigger, so it's harder and harder to train them for anything. So I get why she did that. I just don't really think it was a good thing long term. But anyway.
Isn't that Dany's problem all around, though?
Yeah.
She comes up with short-term solutions, but never fixes the long-term ones.
Definitely.
But once again, in her defense, I can't believe I'm saying this, she's 16 and she doesn't have very good advisors. I think one of the things that came across to me in this chapter is she's got this huge task of training these dragons, and she says, I don't have the time, because she's got, tens and tens of people coming to her with things to redress. And she's told, why don't you delegate some of this? Well, who do I delegate it to? She's got a lot of, fighting people around her, but Barristan, Jorah, these are not sort of counselors. She doesn't have a small council. And I think the pressure on her is extreme. So she's doing the best she can. And I love the fact that from her POV, we see that she is ethically concerned, She, later on, I think my view is she will become someone who uses the dragons and wages merry hell. But she does care that they're killing people. She understands that they're eating bigger and bigger things and that they're this huge problem. She can't control them. And I give her a lot of credit for that. I really do at this stage. Sorry, that's it.
Right. Well, I mean, she's in so far over her head, it's ridiculous. And I mean, who at 16 or even at 30 or 40 could solve the massive problems she has right now? I mean, she's in a no-win situation with everything, with the dragons, with the city, with the fighting pits, with everything. So she's doing her best, but I mean, I don't see there's any good way out of any of this.
Well, but I mean, she got herself into this by her whole like self-entitled feeling that she is the ruler, that she has to do this, she has the right to do this, and now she's dealing with the consequences, and we're saying like, oh, what happened? Well, she could have just stayed, like, she keeps on having these visions of like the Red Door or whatever. Go find that place, like, settle down, be cool. Like, you don't need to be a fucking ruler or a conqueror. Like, you could just chill out.
True. Self-imposed problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. The prophecy. I think for once, it's pretty straightforward, kind of. I mean, more than but I had a point about it. So she mentions the Kraken, the Dark Flame, the Lion, the Griffin, the Sun's Son, and the Murmur's Dragon. And of all of those, some actually arrive. Most actually arrive, but the Griffin and the Murmur's Dragon. So that's John Connington and Fagin. They don't. So how much can we trust in these prophecies if, like, Quaithe obviously saw that they were going towards her, but she didn't see that they were going to make for Westeros instead at some point in the journey. So yeah.
Well, wait a
Yeah.
minute. Who was Dark Flame?
That's
Mokoro.
Mokoro, the red priest who's with Victarion.
Well, if you notice, they're all in pairs too. You've got the Kraken and the Dark Flame, Victarion and Mokoro. You've got the Lion and the Griffin, Tyrion and Jon Con. Son Quentin is on his own. And then Mummer's Dragon is on his own, so that's, obvious. Probably Fagon.
Yeah.
Well, Fagon and John Connington are already in Westeros, or are heading towards Westeros, right?
No, they're heading.
No,
so
they're
at
heading
the beginning
towards her at this point.
Right.
Well, not quite yet, but they soon will be, because
But that's their plan at this point. They're heading towards Volantis to eventually meet up with Dany, and it's only after Tyrion meets up with them and convinces Aegon to do otherwise that they change their course, and then Tyrion actually ends up on the way to Meereen and not the others. But I feel like it's kind of this like classic prophecy thing where if someone changes their mind, you can change the prophecy, and like you only see what people have decided to do at this moment, but if they change their mind, it can also change other things.
But then it's not prophecy. No, that'd be like me prophesizing that, like, I'll have a sandwich for lunch, but then instead I'll make myself some leftovers from Thanksgiving. But it doesn't work. It's like a guess. Like, that's just like saying like one thing, and then when the other thing happens, then like, oh, well, that's...
But a prophecy is going to be about other people. Like, I don't think you can prophesize your own decisions because you're the one making them.
Well, I mean, isn't that the fundamental question when you deal with any, time travel or prophecy or any of that stuff in fiction is, you've got this concept of, is it preordained or do we have control over it? And if we do, how much? And then what does prophecy mean? Because as of now, this is going to happen. Tyrion changes that. So now the question is all of her prophecy changeable? Or maybe are there only certain people who can change things? Like, for instance, maybe Tyrion is a special person because he changes things?
I think that's such a good point. And I think George is really wanting us to have this discussion because he knows very well that we've all watched sci-fi and fantasy where time travel doesn't work and the logic breaks down and prophecies get changed. And what is free will if there's, and I think he's very much playing with us and wanting us to explore these themes, which I love.
Yep.
Yeah, I think Quaithe sees the present more than she sees the future. So, yeah, she can see that at this point, that's where they are going, and that's what they decided to do, to all go to Meereen. But there's still free will, there's still the possibility of someone changing that. I'm not sure Tyrion is a very special person in that sense. I think anyone could just change the prophecy. I mean, and in this sense, I don't really think we should call it prophecy, because prophecy is more about seeing the future, and this is just a vision of what's happening in someone else's head at this point in time, I think, rather than really seeing what's going to happen or what might happen.
Could be.
But with George's like unreliable narrator kind of thing, like it is only Dany. Like, we don't know that it's Quaithe. Like, this is taking the shape of Quaithe in Dany's head.
Right. And in fact, no one else sees her. What's interesting, though, is the bit where she asks, were you, was it you? And she says, yes. And are you here? And she says, yes. But then if anyone else would see her, she says, no.
Well, I mean, my delusions would be like agreeing with me too. Like, no, you're not, hallucinating me. Like, I'm real. Like, I'm this other thing. Like, wouldn't my brain like tell me that, what I'm seeing is real and not something that it conjured?
Mm-hmm. She says, though, that, she says, you did not dream then or now, and then she says, are you here? But then when Dany says, are you here? She says, no, which I find interesting. So But again, that could be all her dream, or it could be some weird magic-y stuff going on. Who knows?
Or she
Except
could be a
Missandei
hologram, and
There you go.
she knows
From the
what the
future.
others are up to because she has GPS trackers on everyone.
There you go.
What are all your basic Quaithy theories? I mean, any future Dany theories out there? I mean, like,
No. I think she's a magic user, and she has powers that are similar to Melisandre because they're both from Ashai, and they both sort of see the future, but their predictions aren't bound to happen, but they can be accurate, but it also depends on how they interpret them. And I think if we ever saw inside of Quaith's head, it would be pretty similar to Melisandre.
Well, that said, I mean, let's be honest, unlike Melisandre, she's pretty right on here. I mean, the Pale Mare comes, the Kraken and the Dark Flame are coming, the Lion and the Griffin, well, the Lion's still coming, we think, but the Griffin and the Mummer's Dragon didn't. But Quentin's still coming, the Sun's Son. We can debate, and that we probably should, who the Perfumed Seneschal is. But I mean, she's batting pretty well here.
Yeah,
let's be honest. For prophecy, she's way ahead of Melisandre.
Well, I think she's just better at interpreting them because we know that Melisandre gets pretty accurate vision, but she's not always able to interpret them.
Exactly.
Or she doesn't, she doesn't see what's being shown to her because she's blinded by her own ideas. And for example, when she's asking for the prince that was promised and she only sees Snow, and she wants to see Stannis, that's a big clue that
she's
the correct vision is in front of her, but she's not interpreting it well.
Yeah. I mean, we'll never really know what prophecy means because, we're never going to get it.
So who do you think is the Perfumed Seneschal?
Well, Dany thinks it's Reznak, which makes it seem likely it's not.
So the possible candidates are Reznak, Varys, and the boat that Tyrion and Makoro. No, Makoro is on the same boat as Tyrion. I have to reread that book because it's all very confusing.
Well, there's the boat, right?
Yeah.
Because the boat's name is translated as Frey Steward.
Stinky Steward.
Yeah.
But then even if it's the boat, who on the boat are they referring to? I mean, is it Tyrion?
Well, there's a lot of people on that boat.
Right. Well, presumably it's probably Tyrion, Jorah, or Makoro, right? I mean.
Yeah.
Well, Tyrion was already called out in the prophecy.
Yeah, and Makoro as well.
Yeah. So it's Jorah.
It's got to be Jorah?
But
yeah, but why wouldn't they just say the bear?
I wouldn't really call Jorah a perfumed anything.
I thought it was Varys now. Isn't that pretty much accepted?
I don't think anything's accepted among fans. But
yeah.
He's only main character that we hear of repeatedly as being perfumed.
Well, there's also Reznak.
He'd be a minor though, wouldn't he?
But and again, Dany thinks so right away, like in the next paragraph.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I don't think George would be that obvious unless he's, going for the haha,
Yeah, apart from Varys, there's not really anything. But I don't know. It bugs me that there's this boat that the name translates to something that could mean Perfumed Seneschal in the same area of the world where the prophecy is happening. Because Varys is in Westeros and he's not really impacting Dany directly.
Right. Although clearly he has some interest given that he sent them there. So he could eventually head there. Or you can even beware him from a distance. I mean,
yeah, but Dany doesn't know him personally. She's never met him. She doesn't know that he works for Fume.
Well, she hasn't met any. I mean, other than Reznak, she hasn't met anyone here yet. Well, Jorah, but
yeah.
So.
But she's about to.
True. She's about to meet most of them.
Most of them.
Unless Tyrion sends some away, which he does.
Yeah.
So does everyone think Varys? If you had to pick one, who would you say?
I'm going to say I don't have an opinion on this.
Alix used the Joker.
Yeah. I'm going to have opinions on other things.
For me, it's definitely Varys. I didn't even realize it was that contested, so...
I don't really see how Varys makes sense at this point in the story. Like all the rest of the prophecy is quite like it's quite short term. Like everyone is going to be there in a relatively short time. But Varys, I mean, he's not going to leave Westeros. There's no way. I don't think that's going to happen.
But it could be an envoy. It could be a plot that he set in motion, a person that's going to arrive that he has sent, because we know he's so involved in. And also, it's not like she says these ones are coming to you, and then separately it's beware the perfume seneschal.
Right. So that could be later.
So it could be he's not on his way to you now, but there's all this Fagon and whatever stuff going on, and beware him because he's involved in this or whatever it is. So I think it's significant that it's separate.
Yeah, and I agree because it's like Varys and Lyrio's machinations that are setting much of this into motion, right?
Yeah.
So it's really at his whim that, we learned in the last chapter that, he really is backing the Aegon character.
Right.
So
I probably would have said Varys right away, but I kind of like the idea of Jorah.
It would be ironic.
Right, because especially given how much he's in love with her, and if somehow whatever he does that she should be aware of, I don't know. I like the idea just because it's not what you'd expect. Whereas Varys, let's face it, if Varys does ever make his way to her, of course she should beware him because he's Varys. And, I mean, that's nothing surprising.
Everyone should beware of Varys, right?
Exactly.
So he fits in very nicely.
That you don't have to be a prophet to tell anyone that.
It just feels that with this prophecy, I mean, George is almost making a bullet point list of plot points he has to make happen in a dance.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
And given having read it, what we know the plot points are is like, evidently Varys needs to be in there somewhere. Because that's the big reveal of these books, isn't it? Or Dance in particular is the whole, I guess, the secret Targ machinations that are going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's right. Does anyone still have points about Dany?
Do we want to say anything more about the chaining of the dragons? How sad it is, and
I don't think it's sad. I think
sad.
they're just mean killers, and they should be killed right now.
But it's sad for Dany. Come on.
I don't think
The
it's
book
sad
is called
because I think
Dance with Dragons. We have to have dragons at some point.
I think Dany is going to end up being evil too.
Yeah.
No pity.
Yeah. He dedicates the first book to not Paris, but some other woman who's like, who made me put in the dragons.
Yeah, another writer. I forget her name now, but
Screw that woman.
I think the problem with the dragons is, and we've done this before in rereads, is they're so immensely powerful. They basically make battles become pointless or uneven. I'm just really looking forward to seeing how George is going to figure out how to introduce dragons to Westeros and not make everything. It's just the end. Apocalypse. Goodbye.
But on the other hand, so are the others. Like, the attack on the Fist of the First Men, we see that men cannot resist those beings either, so you have to have something equally powerful on the side of good if you want to
No, because all we've been fed is that there's this last hero and that men and children of the forest came together to fight the others back in the day, and that can happen again. The fact that she has dragons now just complicates things because you just put in okay, so now they're chained up. Now they have Drogon. You see at the end of the book, okay, so she's living with Drogon, not doing really anything, and still thinks she's a ruler and being captured by a bunch of Dothraki. Nothing about her having dragons actually is helping her except for prestige, right?
Yeah.
Well, she wouldn't. I mean, it depends on how you define helping. I mean, she would certainly. She'd probably be dead if she didn't have the dragons. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, they wouldn't have taken her in anywhere. She'd still be walking through the desert.
Yeah. Also,
they actually probably would have killed her way back in the first book. Actually,
why?
Yeah,
they didn't kill her
after Drogo died. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but after Drogo died, everyone left her besides the old and feeble. And they pledged their allegiance after the dragons hatched. So she didn't gain a Dothraki army or anything. She gained the least of the Dothraki.
Then she would have died in the desert, most likely.
Well, or at least she would have maybe she would have made it to Karth, but no, she would have.
But would they have allowed her in?
They wouldn't let her in. Yeah, they only let her in because of the dragons.
Yeah.
Also, the dragons are linked to the amount of magic in the world. We don't really know if the dragons bring the magic or the magic brought the dragons.
Right.
But there has to be a link between the dragons and the magic and the wall and all of these magic things.
And the others.
And the others.
I agree. All right, guys. Should we move on to Feast? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Everyone's fine with that? Great.
Sure.
Yes.
So after Dany 2, we jump back 52 chapters to the Captain of the Guards in Feast. That's the first time we're ever in Dorne, I think. So this is still on January 20th. And Alix?
Yes, so this chapter is the first time we see Dorne, and we also meet a bunch of characters. The chapter opens through the eyes of a character we've never heard of, who's called Ariahota, and is the captain of the guards at Doran Martell's court. So the chapter opens as Doran is sitting in his wheelchair at the water gardens, and he's watching the children at play, and blood oranges are splattering onto the floor. We get some exposition through the eyes of Ariahota. Throughout the chapter, we learn that he came from Norvos with Doran's wife, Mellario, who isn't really around anymore. But Ario stayed for some reason, and he's still serving Doran all these years later. We have some visitors throughout the chapter. The three eldest sand snakes come to see Doran because they have just learned that Oberyn has died, and they want each one wants a separate kind of revenge. So first we have Obara, who is the eldest, conveniently, and she comes to the water gardens, asks to see Doran, and asks if he knows her father is dead. She wants him to go to war against the Lannisters and march up the Boneway and destroy the Reach also. Doran doesn't really want to do that. He wants to reflect on it a little bit longer, which is what he seems to be doing a lot these days. Then he decides after Obara's visit that they should go back to Sunspear, where he hasn't been in the past 2 years. So that means the people and his enemies are going to see him weakened by gout, and Ario isn't sure how he feels about that, but he is not there to disobey orders, so they make ready and they leave around midday the next day because Doran had to take time to say goodbye to the children. On the way to Sunspear, they come across Nymeria Sand, the second oldest sand snake, also known as Nym, and she asks Doran not for an all-out war, she only wants 4 lives. I'm going to get this wrong. She wants to kill Tywin, Cersei, Jaime, and Tommen, even though Tommen really hasn't done anything ever. Just get rid of him. So Doran's also like, okay, I'll think about that, but I'm not really down for that. And they continue towards Sunspear. They come into the city, and we get a quick description. It's not a very big city, but it has 3 winding walls, which I think was pretty cool. And there's only one place in the city where the gates of the 3 walls align so that they can go directly to the palace. And when they get there, they see all of the rest of the court that's waiting for them. There's Myrcella, who's there with Aerys Oakheart, who doesn't seem to be on very good terms with Ariahota. Foreshadowing. And Tyene Sand is waiting in the throne room for an audience with Doran, and she doesn't want to kill anyone right away. Her plan is she wants to crown Myrcella as the Queen of the 7 Kingdoms and Trystane with her, and let the Lannisters declare war on them. And that's also not very pleasing to Doran, apparently, because he then asks Ario to take all of the Sand Snakes into custody, except for Sorella, because she's not in Dorne, so he's not really worried about her. The end.
Thanks, Alix. Okay, so yeah, we meet a lot of people here, and I think that's really interesting. And we meet them through the eyes of this guy, Ariel who, well, is just a guy. So I think it is interesting because it's a way to see Doran and the others through the eyes of someone who is completely loyal to Doran, but without revealing immediately the whole plan. So we don't really know what to think about Doran Martell at the end of this chapter, and I think it builds the suspense for the big reveal of his whole plan.
Do you think that this is like the first chapter into George's going into unnecessary land? Because we could have just had Quentin and Arianne as like our Dornish POVs, and had them reflect off of Doran, like like Tyrion did with Tywin, or Jaime did with Tywin. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I completely agree. That was one of my first notes. Was it like a literary misstep to make such a minor character that you only end up giving a handful of or couple of chapters to a POV? It just seems kind of like a weak choice. Just give us Doran or Arianne or anyone, really.
I don't know. I think. Yeah, go, David.
I was going to say, I feel like even he almost thinks that, given that he didn't bother to name him in the chapter name. Is this the first one we get of this? Where that's not a epilogue or prologue. Even he seems to feel this isn't important, but he kind of needed someone, so that's what he chose to do. I don't know. I remember when I first read this chapter the first time thinking, why are we here? What does this have to do with anything? And why are we expanding this story even more when there's so much going on? Which is kind of what I thought about the fourth book in general.
I think it's really cool that we get to see this. And I think the main reason George did Ario's POV is for this specific chapter, because it's a perfect introduction to Dorne. We see it through pretty unbiased eyes because he's from Norvos and doesn't really have any ties apart from Doran, who he's serving. But
yeah, I completely agree.
This chapter is really... It has a lot of information. It has a great structure where we see different locations, we meet all these people successively, and we kind of learn everyone's motivations. I think it's really well written, but I agree that Ariel as a character doesn't really have a purpose in the story. He's just there as a pair of eyes.
I mean, couldn't this chapter have been an Arianne chapter with her noting that Doran's trusted bodyguard was present?
I don't know, because
I don't know.
Arianne doesn't have much respect for her father at this point. I mean, she loves him, but until the big reveal, she's like, why doesn't he do anything? And I think this chapter, this way of writing it with Ariel is. I feel like I like Doran at the end of this, and there's some it's still we still don't really know what he's thinking, what he means to do, and with Arianne, I think it would have been much more, oh my god, why isn't my father doing something? And that's what the Sand Snake are doing in this chapter. So I'm not sure it would have brought the same look on Dawn and on Doran Martell.
Yeah, and also Arianne at this point is worried that Doran is going to make Quentin his heir instead of her. Right. And that would have tainted the whole chapter because she's trying to look out for her interests, whereas Ariel doesn't really have any interests. He's just standing there objectively and doing as he's told, and he doesn't really have a personal endgame.
Yeah, so then why is it important to get his POV?
But his POV isn't important.
I think it's because it's unbiased.
His objectivity. That's really the reason why he's the POV of this chapter.
Yeah, it's not a POV because we need to meet this character. It's a POV because we need some eyes, which are someone who is, quite objective.
I think this is actually one of our first POV characters who really doesn't seem to be important for who they are. It seems to be more of we need eyes here, so who are we going to use? I mean, every other POV, even ones in the same place, like, say, Sam or whatever, seems to be important to the story or will be, whereas I don't think that Daario ever will be. One thing I thought was interesting, though, is this is actually my first reread, and the first time I read this, I just was like, through it all. And to be honest, didn't even remember most of it. When I was rereading it for this, I was like, oh, I didn't even remember that. Wow. Oh. And I think this is one of those chapters that I think, and maybe a lot of the Dorne stuff I'll feel that way about, that grows on the reread. I'm a little more interested now. Whereas when I was first reading it, I was just like, why are we doing this? I don't care.
Yeah, because until you get into the story, you don't see the point of it. And I think that's true of a lot of dance. I'm really hoping that a lot of the dance chapters that I found very to struggle with, I'm going to fall in love with maybe on the reread. Fingers crossed.
For me, even more with the feast chapters, actually, for me.
Yeah, Brienne just wandering around and around. Although I love Jaime and Cersei, and I think a lot of that dynamic's in Feast, so that's
true.
I think I probably like it more than most. But...
They're probably the only parts that I liked.
Yeah.
Jaime does have a good presence in Feast, but
yeah.
I love Feast and Dance.
Really?
I was so excited to see Dorne for the first time. Like, even if nothing happens, I just want to visit places.
Yeah.
What blew my mind on the linear reread is just thinking, my God, we haven't finished the Storm of Storms yet, and this chapter's 170 pages into Dance in my version. So it's like, geez, like George, in a way, it makes more sense to do it in a linear order because you realise that the Dornish plot is happening way back in time that Doran's making these plans. Because when you read it in the published order, it's kind of like, oh, Dorne, where did you pop up from? And
exactly.
Okay, Doran, you have some plans, a bit late to the game. Whereas actually you realise that he's been making his plans for Quentyn pretty much at the same time as the Red Wedding. So this major house of Dorne off screen has been as active as the Tyrells are another house that get very active in the Storm of Swords, and he was doing it too. So I kind of like the idea that Dorne gets introduced earlier, this way of reading.
Well, something's up with Dorne as soon as Oberyn Martell walks into King's Landing.
Yeah.
But can we talk about that? I've often said that Doran's just basically someone I don't respect because he sends Quentyn off, and I think that's a really hapless mission. But how can you send the Red Viper to King's Landing and think he's just going to look around? He's not going to kick off any shit. Right. What about his personality makes you think he's the appropriate person to not start off shit in King's Landing when he sees a Lannister or the Hound? I mean, no.
Fair.
Yeah, fair. But in Doran's defense, this whole chapter, I was just in pain. Every description of him, he seems like he's in so much pain.
Yeah, but you know what? My dad has gout. He's not stupid.
Yeah. I'm not saying he's not stupid. I'm just saying I feel bad for him.
Oh,
because he's in pain all the time.
Yeah, no, and actually it's a really good description. And every time he picks up a blood orange, you're just thinking, don't eat the citric acid, dude. Lay off the wine. Oh, poor guy. He also really reminds me when he's watching the kids playing in the water of The Godfather, Marlon Brando. I kind of envision him as that old man, watching the grandchildren at play.
So is that creepy though?
It's a little bit creepy.
Found it, yeah. He's always like,
so
watch
cynical.
The children, they're at play.
I don't know.
There's something a little off, discomforting about it.
But I feel that if it were meant to be creepy, wouldn't George tell us it were creepy?
Yeah.
But then
what else is he supposed to do? He's just sitting there waiting.
Read
all
a book?
The time. Yeah, I don't know.
We're so cynical.
Yeah, I know. There are plenty of creepy Peter related.
But what if a blood orange falls on his book while he's reading? Then it's ruined.
1% problems, Alex.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mary. I've totally taken this off route.
Oh, no. No, not at all. I'm with Alex on this. I think it's a really great chapter. I love to be introduced to all these sand snakes. We don't know. I don't know if I want to like them or not because they're just these hothead. They just want war or to kill people, basically. But still, you tend to want to like them because they're just. They're kind of, they are like Oberyn's, and in the same sense, Oberyn was kind of an absurd character in the sense that he's too much of everything, and it's the same for them. They're really, they're not very nuanced at this point, which is, I don't know if it's interesting. I don't know if it's a mistake. I don't know if it would be more interesting if they were more nuanced. I think the nuance comes from their number and not them personally. But yeah, and we have a mention of Sarella.
Yeah, I love that. And also, well, I don't think it means anything, but a fun fact is that this chapter is actually chronologically before the prologue where we meet Alaras. So maybe that's also a reason why George waited until Feast to introduce Dorne, because that way we would make the connection right away with Sorella.
Yeah, but that seems stupid.
Why is it stupid, that?
Because don't you want to like advance a narrative as much as possible through each book, rather than like having these stupid, like, I mean, major cliffhangers, like, is Jon really dead, like stuff like that. That's something to end the book on. But like, who the fuck cares about Sorella being Alaris or not? Like, why would you hold on to that? Like, it doesn't mean anything. It just means that, okay, there might be a sand snake at the Citadel.
Yeah, no, I don't think it means much, but if we had this chapter before the Pate chapter, everyone would have been like, okay, this Alaras is definitely Sorella because we know she's in Old Town, we know she's into being a maester, blah, blah, blah. But when we see Alaras for the first time, we have no idea who that could be. And it's only with this chapter that we learn about a sand snake named Sorella who's in Old Town, and we're like, oh, but we met this person.
But I think
I definitely didn't catch that the first time, at least.
Yeah, I didn't either. But I think most of it is that you get into Feast, and it's a whole new dynamic and a whole new atmosphere. I feel like it's not like Storm. Things are different.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So like this chapter at the end of Storm would just make no sense. We would be even more like, what? What is this doing here? I mean,
definitely.
Yeah, true.
Also, I really like this chapter because, well, it's in the beginning of Dance, and it's the first chapter in Dorne, and it's really structured kind of like a fairy tale with 3 sand snakes asking for 3 different things, and they each have their little personalities, and also, Tyene is such a caricature. Like, she's a Septa's daughter, so she's blonde with blue eyes. Oh my god.
They're all caricatures.
And there's this little journey from the Water Gardens to the city, and I don't know, structurally, it's very pleasing to read.
Mm-hmm. The thing, though, is I'm not sure how well the sand snakes come across as you're first meeting them. Like,
They're quite stupid, aren't they?
Yeah, I didn't find any of them interesting. They were too single-minded, too caricatures, as we've said. I mean, some bits I like a little bit about, like, Obara being a slut, saying that she could master any horse in Dorne and any man as well, and a few things like that. But there wasn't much that made me want all these people to want to be interested in these people, and especially with them pushing Doran, it just made me like, I don't know if I like these kids yet.
Obara is nearly 30 though.
Right. They're his kids, so
yeah.
So
yeah, I have to say, I know Amin is like a massive Dawn fan though, but I find it very hard to maintain interest in any kind of art form where the characters are sort of deliberately, willfully sort of thick. And I had this recently. I was watching this movie, you can edit this out, Mary, called Good Time, starring Robert Pattinson, and it's like an art house movie, and everyone loves the direction, and it's edgy and it's a thriller. Like, every single decision he makes is so stupid and against his own interests that I was like, I just can't watch. I know it's visually brilliant, but I just can't get into this film. And I feel like that with the Sand Snakes. They're like just like these kind of like whiny teenagers, even though they're like 30.
Yeah.
And then Doran just does all this stuff that he thinks is so sneaky and so clever, and I've sent this person off here and that person off there, but I'm not going to tell anyone my plans. And you just think, and what's it all for? The Red Viper ended up dead. Maybe he did tickle or prick or whatever the mountains that he's dead to, but what a loss. And you sent your son off to die. Brilliant. Well done.
Yeah.
Bravo.
But not only that, but you're not only in awful health, you haven't told anyone else until the very end of this book when he tells Arianne like his broad plan. Like, don't you think like the second like he was wheelchair ridden, he'd be like, hey, I might go, but this is like what we have in play right now, like, just so.
Well, in fairness, with gout you don't die of it, it's just uncomfortable.
Well, but if let's say he did die for anything, I mean, he's the prince, anyone could have killed him, you never know how would all of his plans would be for naught because no one knows them.
I sometimes wonder if being in Dorne, like territorially, is quite safe. It's like being Switzerland. It's just very hard for people to invade you. And does that make you complacent and a little bit sort of less prepared than if you're like ruling the Riverlands? You just have to be on it, on your game, because you're so vulnerable. Whereas when you're in Dorne, everything just moves at a slower pace because, you know, if someone's really going to invade you, it's one of the Sand Snakes says this, we can just use our territory against them, just let them come to us and we'll just demolish them in the passes. And I wonder if that just gives you a false sense of security and patience. And
I don't think so. Like, I see what you're saying. I think it gives you a sense of security from like getting invaded from the Riverlands or the Stormlands or from, you know, the Lannisters, because they do have to invade. But you see like the population and how it's in an uproar about Oberyn, that's probably your biggest threat, like are your own people and like how hot-blooded they are, or, you know, wanting vengeance, and they look at you and see like you're ineffectual, and I think that's where the real threat is.
Yeah, I don't think they're more complacent than anyone else. Like, Liza is in the Eyrie and she thinks nothing can touch her because her castle is so well defended. Well, she ends up dying from inside that castle, so you never know.
Right.
And, like, Cersei isn't the smartest person either. Neither is Ned. I mean, a lot of these characters make poor decisions. I agree that a lot of the Dornish decisions aren't the best, but I don't think they're more stupid than anyone else in the series.
yeah, no, it's true. I mean, like, there's plenty of bad decision making that goes on, and that's human, and that's fine. That's not convincing. I'm lacking in sympathy. I'm just such a bad person. I really am. Moving on.
So we now jump back 14 chapters to Jon 9 in Storm. This takes place on the next day, and so Jon is 17 at this point, and we saw him 5 days ago at the start of the Battle of the Wall, and he's now in charge of the wall as no one else is here. Matt, you have the recap.
Yeah, so this chapter is pretty straightforward. The Brothers of the Night's Watch continue to defend the wall, and they're running low on resources. They learn that the arrows of the wildlings can finally hit them as one guy goes over the edge. The rest of the fighters are at the Bridge of Skulls fighting the Weeper, and they learn that Bone Marsh gets injured, and Andrew of Tarth, which is a character that I didn't realize was actually a character, was killed. So I don't know if that's like Brienne's cousin or Brienne's brother or what's going on there, but we have an Andrew of Tarth, and the wildlings build a turtle, which is basically an upside down ship's hull, to protect them as they hack away at the gate, and the brothers are able to repel them, and Pip gets in charge of the wall, and while Jon sleeps, the fucking assholes Janos Slynt and Sir Alliser Thorne come in and then accuse him of being a turncoat, and Janos Slynt is basically the worst, and he's just an asshole. And Rattleshirt comes in,
Rattleshirt,
and fingers Jon as killing Corrin, and he even is able to get in like a little sly, like everyone fears the Lord of Bones, and then he gets kicked in the face and like shuts up. So it's a fairly uneventful chapter. It's just basically people, like, they're just the worst. Alliser Thorne thinks he's, in charge, like basically wills himself in charge, and is so incredibly like just full of himself that he, immediately dismisses Jon as a traitor's bastard, and like he knows the Starks and they're all traitors, and I think this kind of attitude is really what makes his beheading so satisfying and later on in Danes.
Oh, yeah. Janos Slynt,
Yeah.
you mean? Yeah.
Janos, yeah.
Both of them.
Yeah, both of them.
are
Yeah,
pretty.
but at least
Both of them are
Alliser
assholes.
Thorne. At least Alliser Thorne respects Jon once he's Lord Commander.
I think he respects the authority of...
Yeah, he respects the office.
Right.
And that's why he doesn't get beheaded.
That's all you need, is to respect the office. I also think Alliser Thorne's quite you know, he's not stupid. Like when Stannis is kind of like basically saying, come on, get on with it, elect a new Lord Commander, he's the one who's saying, no, we've got to defend the elections. Like, he genuinely does care about the Night's Watch, I think. He's a bully, right, and he's horrible, but I think he's not totally without some good qualities. Sorry, Alex.
Yeah. No, I totally agree, but Janos is the worst.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't know, like, I didn't count exactly how many times his jowls were mentioned in this chapter, but it's up there.
Yeah. And I didn't remember this happened in the middle of the battle. I thought it was afterwards, but they do show up in the middle of the fighting, right, and they're like, no, you can't fight anymore, you're a traitor.
Yeah, it's so absurd. Like, the beginning of the chapter is just, everyone is fighting, they're fighting for their lives, for the wall, right. It's so, like, it's important, you know, it's something important is happening there.
Yeah, and there's like five of them defending the whole realm.
Yeah.
Right.
And then they show up, and it's like this absurd kind of trial. And you're like, why? What? How are these guys sitting there and not fighting?
Can't this wait? that was my big note for this part of it. Is can't this wait?
I have thoughts about the trial. I have thoughts about how Jon. This is all like if you think they're secret targs and two of the three heads of the dragon. So I think there's a really strong parallel between Tyrion and Jon in this chapter. So both of them were trying to save their holdfast, so Tyrion King's Landing and Jon the Wall. Both were accused of treachery for having not done their job or for having undermined the job. Both use a specific and unique tech, so wildfire and then the frozen gravel barrels, which are awesome. Both get tried in front of a kangaroo court, so it's a trial that, you know, is never fair and one-sided. Both are accused of fucking whores. Both are mocked for an accident of birth, bastardy, dwarf. It just struck me for the first time, I've read this a few times actually, that it just really struck me how I always think as Jon and Dany being set up against each other in dance as people struggling with rule. But here you're getting a nice little echo of what Tyrion's going through in his trial. Just very unfair, not the opportune moment, and never any gratitude for having, you know, Tyrion saves King's Landing, and Jon is getting no gratitude here for having held off the attacks. You know, if it weren't for Jon, these people wouldn't be able to just march in and sort of be all bossy. So yeah.
It's a really good point, and it's I think it's a parallel that goes back to a Game of Thrones actually, when Tyrion goes to the wall with Jon. There's already some kind of a connection there, and they learn to have respect for each other.
Yeah.
And there's already these lines about bastards and cripples and stuff like that, which links them already as characters who are basically rejected by the world. And it's all in there. I don't even want to say trial, but this whole circus here is very reminiscing of what Tyrion is going through.
On a less serious note, is this the first time we hear Jon swear?
Maybe. It sounded so out of character.
Wait a minute, when does he swear?
When the guy's like, why did you bother freezing the barrels of gravel? And he's like, I don't want to just like, sprinkle gravel on them. I want to like hit the turtle with a... And he refers to them as whore sons. And I was like, wait, Jon just said a naughty word.
Yeah,
and he also called
act tough in front of the brothers because he's in charge.
I just think it's a sign of it's how tired and how pissed off and how like in pain he is, and it's like finally we broke Jon. He swore.
But it's also I thought it was interesting too that he called the wildlings whoresons after having spent so much time with them.
Yeah, and also technically also being a bastard himself, which is kind of interesting.
True.
Do you think there's anything significant to the fact that he can't dream of Ghost and he's just having these weird dreams of the crypts and the dead kings of Winterfell?
I mean, there has to be. It's so heavy-handed. Like, every fucking chapter of Jon, it's like, he's down in the crypts, he doesn't belong. We get it. Like, what does that mean? Like, it has to lead to something. And, you know, whether it's his feeling of, like, displacement or whatever, but who knows? Right now, he's dead. Like, that's it.
Right.
No more Jon chapters.
We'll see about
I also
that.
kind of laughed that the arrows were finally hitting the brothers and that they made a little game out of it. But then I was thinking, like, if they're clearing the wall, like, what's happening with like all the old and feeble guys that are like, Maester Aemon and like that other knight guy that's like the most senior person? Like, are the arrows just dropping on like in Castle Black like randomly?
Maybe. Of course, realistically, how could an arrow really clear the wall? I mean, it's what, 900 feet tall?
Yeah,
I mean,
it doesn't. It's really
maybe if the giants were doing it, but other than that, I mean, how is that really even possible? I mean, is there anyone on the planet Earth right now who could shoot an arrow 900 feet in the air?
I'm sure there is, but I mean,
That's
you get like
high.
a
90 feet is like the Prudential Center.
No, it's not.
I mean, 900 feet. 900 feet is like the Prudential Center.
every time we have this discussion, I'm like, I have to Google feet against meters
Yeah.
again.
Oh, I'm sorry, 300 meters. It's like a skyscraper. Could you shoot an arrow over a skyscraper?
Well,
Yeah.
I couldn't.
I mean, could even like an Olympic athlete shoot one over a skyscraper? No.
If I can, I'm guessing an Olympic athlete can.
There you go.
I'm saying it right now.
He did it last week. I know.
But you can try this out. I mean, like the one thing this chapter really reminded me of reading it was when you play medieval Total War Barbarian Invasion expansion pack, and you can get testudos and scorpions and all of this stuff, and it's really really good. Sorry.
But we spent a lot of time talking about the turtles.
That's 'cause
Half
turtles
the
are
war
awesome.
section.
Turtles are awesome, and actually I think this is one of, I mean, I love medieval fiction and I love playing Total War, Rome Total War, and this is basically the same tech in medieval, and this is actually one of the better descriptions of battle. I mean, a lot of the times George skips battles or we see them off screen, but this is a really good example, I think, of the noise and what it would feel like and what kind of tech beats other tech. It feels like it's very convincing and very authentic. I really like that.
Yeah. I like the little character bits in there too, like Pip naming the scarecrows after all their missing brothers.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
And just
I like-
making jokes all the time, even though they're fighting for their lives. He's
Or
just
making the
not-
same jokes every morning.
Yeah.
That I love.
I like Tormund just like eating while directing
Yes.
people.
Yep.
I was like, that's Tormund.
Yep.
But yeah, so Pip, when an arrow goes by his head, says "fie," F-I-E, as an exclamation. What is that? Is that like onomatopoeia? Like just try, like I don't understand what that word is. Is it "fi"?
It's an exclamation used
yeah.
to express disgust or outrage.
Yeah. Don't you hear it
Alas,
in like
my
Shakespeare?
lord, that you should confuse your bride with another. Fie, I say. I don't know if it's fie or fie. It's fie.
I think it'd be fi,
it's-
no?
It's in like Shakespeare and stuff. Isn't
Fi
it?
on
I
you.
think
Yeah, like I think
Yeah.
it's fi.
Is it? I didn't know that was a thing.
Google says so.
Oh, it's definitely a thing. It's definitely
I feel
like
like
a Shakespearean era thing.
Yeah, I've heard it in Shakespeare stuff. That's about it, I think.
Yeah.
That I
Oh,
know.
another thing. So the Lord of Bones says, yeah, we killed him and all his other brothers. What about like Stone Skin, Snake Skin, whatever that guy that like went like climbing into the mountains and was never heard from again? Like, so can we take it that like he's officially dead, or?
I don't know. I don't know if Rattleshirt had like the correct number of people figured out because he's not particularly smart, and I don't think he had a lot of intel about the Black Brothers.
But I think it's fair to say that all of them are dead, though. I mean, I don't see anyone coming back from the Frost Fangs alone.
Yeah.
But
I don't know, maybe Stone Snake managed to like hide in a cave somewhere and waited for all the wildlings to pass, and he's gonna come back at some point. Or he got killed by the others and is now
yeah,
Maybe we'll see him later as another.
and maybe
Yeah.
you won't.
I'm
That's,
guessing we'll never see him.
the whole thing.
Oh, and
But
one
if
last
he
thing
died-
about this chapter is Owen the Oaf dreams that the king comes. That it's Robert, not Stannis, but it's still like a nice little thing.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool that he dreams it was Robert when like Robert's brother actually shows up.
And everyone knows in the realm that Robert's been dead for like a year.
Yeah. But it also I feel like it's a nice touch, and it reinforces Stannis's claim to like the Baratheon line, because we keep saying like Stannis is blinded by ambition or whatever. But if people are dreaming about Robert, maybe there's kind of a symbolism about this this dynasty of Baratheon kings and Stannis being there to carry the torch and defend the realm like Robert would have. I feel like it's a nice touch of symbolism for Stannis because we don't get a lot of positive things about him.
I don't care about Stannis. Yes, not yet, at least.
Well,
He's coming
it's pretty
soon.
cool that he comes to the wall.
Yeah. Another thing, we get another call out to the Horn of Winter, just because we need to keep thinking about it.
Do you think
You know-
Mance has it? What do you think is the horn that Mance carries?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's just like a big fucking horn that he's using as a gambling piece. Like, I don't think it's the Horn of Winter, but like, no one's like, okay, so like he's using it like and just saying like, this is a Horn of Winter. Like, if I blow it, the wall will come down, but you know, I'd rather not. So like, there's no testing. Like, I don't know. I think it's just like a big giant's horn, and like he's just gambling that people will believe it's the Horn of Winter.
Aren't we assuming that Sam has the horn?
No.
Or that Euron
But
has it.
there's
Right.
horn
Well,
of
Sam
Jaruman as well.
has it. I thought Sam had it, and that Euron will probably end up with it.
No,
But
no.
what
The
is
theory
Euron's horn?
Those
that's
are
the
two different
Dragonbinder
horns.
horn.
Yeah.
Right, but no, I thought Sam found the horn
No.
way back.
John
Well,
found
he
the
found
horn
a
and gave
horn.
it to Sam.
But,
Right, and
but I agree
mean-
with you. That's my take on this as well. I think it's the
Right.
one that no one cares about that Sam
Yeah,
has.
it's just an old
Right.
broken horn.
And Sam has it, and he's in Old Town, and Euron's heading to Old Town.
Yeah, Sam can take him.
All right, guys. I think Bina wanted to kind of wrap this up at about 2 hours. So
Which is
we're
ironic
closing
considering how
in.
much shit I've spoken to wind it down, right?
I was just
Well,
going to say that.
I think we can at least. Well, I can ask if anyone still has anything on Jon. Nope.
Yeah.
All right. And so I can at least close, do the outro officially, and we can keep talking with everyone who wants to keep talking. But let me, officially close this. So, thank you everyone for listening. For those along at home, next episode will be hosted by Adam, and we'll cover Asha 1 from Feast, Jon 10 from Storm, and Victorian 1 from Feast. So, those of you who missed Patrick and who love the Iron Man, everyone's going to be there, obviously. You can, as usual, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, iTunes, WordPress. Just search for Vassals of Kingsgrave and you will basically find us. And to get involved, maybe participate in a podcast or just chat with us on the forums, you can search for a podcast of Ice and Fire forums and just join us. All right. Does anyone have upcoming podcasts they want to talk about or just anything they want to put out there?
So largely because of my flakiness, we didn't get around to recording Alias Grace, so I'm going to revive the CTA. It'll probably now be in about 2 or 3 weeks' time when I'm back from travel, so hopefully we can get the original crew back together, but also anyone who's still in the midst of watching and then has a chance to finish and wants to join, that would also be great.
I think me and Bina are going to do a double bill today, and we're going to discuss JFK with FT Ward and who else is on that?
I think Jock Monroe.
Oh, yeah, Jock. So I don't know when that will be out, but we're recording it this afternoon,
All right.
evening.
I've done recently the Justice League one based on the movie, and that should be out soon if it isn't already by the time this comes out.
And this is a little bit later in time, but after the Christmas episode of Doctor Who this year, we're planning on doing an episode on season 10 and the Christmas episode that we will
Oh,
record
nice.
probably in January. So if anyone's interested, there's a thread on the forums.
Yeah,
So
I-
is that Christmas episode going to be the first one with the new Doctor then, or
I think it's the last one with Capaldi.
There probably will be a regeneration at the end of it,
Yeah.
so we'll get to
and
see
maybe
her, see her for a
we'll
few
hear-
seconds.
Yeah, maybe we'll hear her first words or something, but that's not even sure.
Right. And we're getting
So
the first
excited.
the irony that was actually what sent me out to get a headset so that I could actually join you guys. Was I said, well, I could do Doctor Who one. I'll figure that one out because I know a lot about that because I've been a fan of it for 30 years.
In the end, we
And we
haven't
still
even
haven't
done it yet.
But we figured it was best to wait until the Christmas special at this point.
So that way we can end Capaldi's era in style.
Yes, exactly.
Vox style.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me. Thanks everyone for listening. And yeah, all right. We're in the after show, people.
Thank you very much for
I'm
listening,
gonna have
Mary.
to go.
Yeah.
A pleasure, as always.
Yeah, I'm gonna bug out. But I can leave it recording if you like.
I don't know. I guess, Matt, you're also maybe gonna want to maybe spend some hours not on your phone today. I don't know.
I'm actually in my podcasting suite, so I'm not on my phone right now.
Are you and Bina doing today, the other one?
This afternoon, I think. Did Deputy Ward?
He hasn't confirmed this, so I'm not sure. I don't think he realizes he's actually the sort of the
Hosting?
lead host. Yeah, exactly.
Everyone wanted to do everything this weekend. Weren't they doing the sexual harassment one this weekend too? Or they were talking.
I don't know
think
if
it
anyone was available.
Yeah, they were talking about it. I don't know if it happened.
I don't know
Okay,
how.
I gotta go. My parents are calling me.
Bye, Alex.
Oh.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, Alex.
Bye, Alex. Talking to you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.